Hey, it's Carrie.
And Ashley.
We welcome you to the Self-Care Cafe. We are both health professionals and moms and nature lovers and food lovers and love helping women get over dieting and just start living. We think that talking about bodies and perfect bodies and dieting is just boring.
Did we put you to sleep there, Carrie?
Yes. So if you are ready to ditch dieting and get to living and talk about more important things, then you are in the right place. We don't put shame and guilt on the menu here. You don't even have to tip us.
Nope.
Come hang with us. The advice is free. We want to have a bunch of girlfriends to just hang out with and get real with, and it's time to start living, ladies.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Ashley. Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
I had to throw that in. We're recording.
I figured you would.
Your birthday. I won't sing for you, though.
That's all right.
So besides your birthday, what do we have on the menu for today?
Well, I'm definitely having cake or something later. I hope. I'm not making it, so I hope somebody does it.
You're taking a risk there, girl.
I know. No, my family's good. They'll figure it out. But for the podcast today, we are talking about the intuitive eating principles. So the first phase was breaking up with dieting, and we talked about the principles 1 through 4. And we're finally done with the breakup.
Woo!
And we get to move on to the next.
Breakup's over. Time to heal.
That's right. And so we get to move on to the next phase today, which is getting to know your body. And the principle we're covering today is principle 5 of intuitive eating, which is discover the satisfaction factor.
All right, hold up. What does that mean? Satisfaction factor?
I knew you were going to ask me that, and I don't, as always, have great explanation, but I'll do my best. I guess how I would explain it is when we're feeling satisfied from our food choices, we kind of eat when we need to, whether it's hungry or whether it's I need to eat before my meeting or whatever, like we've talked about in the past few episodes. And then once we're finished eating, we kind of can forget about food until the next time we need to eat again.
Okay. So what this is reminding me of is sometimes like if I want something and I don't go, like let's say I'm craving cupcakes. Like, even just like the menu, like we just had mini cupcakes at Easter, like just little popsicle things. And the next day I was like, I'm not gonna eat them. Like I've had, but that's all I could think about. Right. So I tried, I'm like, well, instead of that, I'll have some berries and cottage cheese or something, like, but all I could think about was still the cupcakes because the berries and cottage cheese didn't feel satisfying to me. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yes. Yeah. I feel like what you're describing is like when we're having some sort of food craving almost, and craving might be a little bit strong of a word, or maybe it's just that culture kind of twisted the word craving into this like out of control feeling about I want this food, you know what I'm saying? So like maybe a food preference idea or something like that, or hey, this sounds good to me right now. That's definitely, I think, what you're describing is, hey, this cupcake sounded good. And I wanted to see if I was like hungry. And so we tried the cottage cheese and berries, but apparently it was just I really wanted cupcakes and I figured that out. And then I went ahead and had them. And then I forgot about them afterwards.
Right. And then honestly, it didn't taste like because they had started drying out. So I'm like, oh, it doesn't even taste very good. So I ended up with one mini cupcake and looked at the other ones. I'm like, why'd you have to dry out so fast?
I know, that's so disappointing. And that brings up something that I don't think we really planned on talking about today, but, like, when the food you're so excited about it, but it just doesn't taste the same way as you're hoping it to, and so then we can decide, "Well, I'm gonna keep eating it," and, like, sort of be disappointed, but
Right.
also have the memory of how good it usually tastes. Oh, that is a hard
Or
one.
and not taste, but also feels, right?
Right,
Like,
exactly.
'cause isn't part of satisfaction also not just something tasting, and satisfying the taste, but isn't it also like the how it feels in your mouth? Like, I love frosting, and so that little blob of frosting on it and the moist cupcake um, and, like, the way it looks and smells because they were so cute and
Yes.
colorful and right, is it all the senses that kinda get involved with satisfaction, or is it just the taste factor?
No, you're right, it's everything, and I think that's another part of it too, like, the more senses that we get involved, I think it just increases that eating experience, I guess, because,
Mhm.
like you always say with journaling or affirmations or things like that, like, instead of just thinking them, writing them out, because then you're using your tactile, you're writing it out, and your visual, because then you can see it, and so it's the same thing, like, having more of the senses involved increases that experience. It makes it a little bit stronger to us.
Right, right. That makes sense.
Yeah, and the satisfaction factor as part of intuitive eating, um, in the framework of intuitive eating, they talk about it as being like the hub or at the center of intuitive eating. They kind of turn it into like an intuitive eating wheel with all of the principles as like spokes on the wheel, but the satisfaction piece is in the middle, which is really interesting, I think,
Mm,
because it really does almost dictate like how we go about our food choices and how we sort of deal with all the rest of the principles that we talk about.
mm. Yeah, and it don't you think too, like, we talk a lot about getting off the dieting mentality and stuff, and I'm wondering if the satisfaction thing like, diets are not satisfying, right?
Correct. Oh my
Like,
god.
if you're constantly either you're eating food you don't really like, or you're not quote unquote allowed to eat food that you like on some diet, or you're not eating enough food. It seems like the satisfaction factor would come into play big time there too.
Definitely. Yeah, with dieting, you're always feeling like that deprivation,
Hmm.
right? And then with when we're eating with what our body's sort of telling us and we're enjoying the food and we don't have any feelings any which way about the food except for maybe a little bit of joy and positive experiences, right?
Yeah.
Because if we're eating what our body's telling us and we're enjoying it and it's a positive experience, we're going to have a better relationship with food just based on those things. Whereas dieting is the opposite. We're restricting, we're almost like punishing our body. It's miserable.
Mhm.
It changes our brain chemistry, and it's just such a negative experience. And if that's what we're constantly working with as far as food and nutrition, you can see how different those two experiences can be.
Right. Right. Um, so what is the difference between, or is there a difference between like feeling full, like if you're full, aren't you satisfied?
Not always. This is such a good one to talk about because a lot of us might feel full in our stomach if you
Hmm.
have, access to your fullness cues and can kind of tell. And we're often still like thinking about that cupcake like you were talking about. I know that after most of my meals, I do feel like having something a little sweet, but not every time.
Hmm.
Um, and so my belly can be full from dinner or my meal or whatever, and I can say, "Ooh, you know what sounds really good? This." Well, I don't know. There's, little Easter candies in my house right now too, so I just have a couple of those when I feel like it, and so we can be eating food and then feel like having something else because either we didn't get it in our meal or, you know, almost
Hmm.
that habit or craving of having something sweet after a meal.
Yep.
But as far as like the dieting side too, I feel like we get stuck in this cycle of eating what's quote unquote allowed on the diet plan, but that's not what our body wants at all. And so then our bellies might be full, but then we're craving like the higher calorie, higher sugar stuff because that's not what we're allowed. It's kind of like the restriction mindset, like we've talked about before, and the satisfaction piece kind of working against you.
Right. Right. I always thought it was interesting that, and I think that a lot of times different cultures kind of make fun of us in America because of all the dieting and the weighing. And I remember once I had a client who grew up in Europe, and she's like, we don't get weighed at the doctors. Like, they don't, that's just not part of what they do.
Mhm.
Um, and the other thing too is, you hear of like certain cultures, and uh, like mealtime is like an event,
Yep.
right? They all sit
Businesses
down,
close.
yes, and they sit down and they pay attention to what they're eating, and they enjoy it. And even things like pasta, they eat it all,
Mhm.
but they pay attention
They
to,
savor it.
what was that?
They savor it, and they're, like,
They
getting the
they
pleasure from their food.
Right. And I heard this little trick, and if you're listening to this, you can try this. So if you like chocolate, when was the last time you took a piece of chocolate and just put it in your mouth and let it just melt there and really focused on how that felt and how it tasted and how it was making you feel, right? Like,
Mhm.
that's just it's a good way because it is something that you can just put in your mouth and let it melt. Um because we don't do that. We just like, oh, I'm craving chocolate, or I want some chocolate, and in it goes. And
Right.
doing it that way might not satisfy you either. And
Yeah,
you might think, oh, you need more because you're not satisfied. When in fact, if you slowed down and focused on how it actually tasted and felt in your mouth, that can satisfy you more.
for sure, and you kinda reminded me of, we're gonna talk about this a little bit more in detail, but distracted eating.
Mm,
Um, with the example that you just gave, Carrie, it's like I'm distracted with my thoughts of
mm,
how I'm not supposed to be doing this or whatever the
mm.
case might be, and so then we don't get the full experience because we're not, like you said,
But-
enjoying.
Well, and if you're eating something that you feel like you're not supposed to be eating, and you're being bad because you're eating it, then those feelings are going to override any enjoyment that you might get out of it.
Exactly.
And and weirdly and ironically, we end up eating more of it, like, right, because it's just this vicious cycle that we get into.
Yeah, it really is, and so your example of, like, the different cultures is really interesting because, like you said, other cultures almost, like, live to eat, and all of us here are, like, terrified to eat.
Mm-hmm.
Or, like, anything we put in our mouth is calories, and, oh my gosh, shouldn't we eat, like, no calories every day? Um,
Right.
it's interesting how different everybody is
Hmm.
kinda.
Yeah, and how different they just approach our bodies and health and all of it. Like, what happened? Like, at what point, it's
Mhm.
interesting.
Capitalism. All the diet and weight loss industry, they just made all this crap up, I think. Oh.
Let's see. So, okay, so we've gone over what satisfaction is. Um, so how? How can I how? Tell me how.
Well, I think, first of all, we have to unlearn a lot of the stuff that is keeping us from being satisfied. So, whether that's figuring out your hunger signals, whether it's looking at your food rules, kind of going back to deprogram yourself from that diet mentality. So if you're still having a lot of those things happening, go back and listen to the last few episodes where we cover those principles. I think that piece is really important because you can't do what we're about to talk about fully, I think. maybe a little bit, but not fully with having a lot of reservations about food choices or things like that that might come with it. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yep, it does.
So so the
So
first
you gotta start at the beginning.
yeah, pretty
And
much. And
go back and do the mindset work first.
exactly. And I feel like you can do this. It just might be a lot of back and forth. And if that's the way that's going to work for you, that's great. It might work for some people, it might not work for others. So sort of, hear what we have to say and figure out where you might feel like is the best place to start for you.
Yeah,
Um,
you may have already done a lot of this work through the years, little by little.
yeah,
Um, so just kind of go where are you right now with all of this? Um, what more what do you have to work on, if or are you ready to jump right into this part of it?
for sure. Because the first thing I'm going to say might be really scary to a lot of people.
Mm,
So the first thing is to ask yourself, like, what do I really want to eat right now? And how often do we actually ask ourselves that question? And secondly, how often do we actually follow through with what our body tells us? I think that's really interesting to think about. Like Carrie always says, we often put our food choices and nutrition under the microscope, and this is sort of letting ourselves look at it a little bit differently.
yeah, and that is scary because it comes down to also trusting yourself,
Yes. Yep.
which a lot of us don't trust ourselves, especially with food. Um, so it is working on that and trusting that you you do know your body. You're getting to know your body in a different at a different level, in a
Mhm.
different way. Um, and that it's okay. And it's okay to feel hesitant and scared. Just acknowledge it. And then just, keep plodding on.
Mhm. Try it, see how it goes.
Hmm.
Because the only way we can make changes that we want is to change something.
Hmm.
Yeah. So when we're asking ourselves, what do we want? We can take into account so many different pieces. Sometimes it might feel like 100 questions when we're first starting, but you can sort of narrow things down. Like if you have no idea, think about, well, what taste do I want? What aroma do I feel like right now? Um, how will it feel or taste in my mouth? Do I want sweet or salty or savory or sour, smooth, crunchy? Do I want some fluid? Like there's so many different pieces
Hmm.
to it. Or do I want something hot or cold or room temp? Do I want something that's lighter or do I feel like I want something a little heavier or more filling? And one of the ones I really think about a lot is how will my stomach feel when I'm finished eating? Like sometimes we can go into meals really hungry. And so for me, I would want something that's a little more filling and I want to feel full in my stomach when I'm finished. In
Hmm.
addition to like, I know my body needed fuel. So I want to feel not only full in my stomach, but also like have a little bit more energy.
Hmm.
So maybe that means not being like overly full or uncomfortably full, but that comfortable fullness.
Yeah, and that takes some practice,
Yeah,
especially
sure.
if you have been following meal plans or diets that have dictated, you've been measuring your food or something like that. Um, Allowing yourself to feel what that feels like to feel full, because if you have been restricting yourself for so long, um, you might not ever or rarely get to the point of feeling that fullness.
Yeah,
And so at first you might eat past the point of comfortable fullness, and
right.
that's okay. This is all practice, right? And trial and error, and figuring out what works for you, and at what point do you feel comfortable. And some people would rather eat a little bit less but eat more often,
Hmm.
right? Like, um and so it's figuring out, like we've always said, what works for you and your body and
Yeah.
lifestyle.
I'm glad you brought that part up because if you aren't sure about your fullness, I think Carrie's point made a really poignant point.
A poignant point.
Because if you are not sure about your fullness, it's easy to flip-flop from restricting where we're not probably getting quite full a lot of the time to then, well, I'm going to eat a lot and then get to uncomfortable fullness. And
Mhm,
that's not what fullness has to be, but it can be a part of quote unquote normal eating, whatever that means.
mhm.
Because we all have experiences where we're eating past comfortable fullness. And yes, I would like to land personally where it's like comfortable fullness most of the time, but if something's really tasty or we're celebrating a special event and there's lots of food or whatever, it's okay to do it. It's putting yourself in that driver's seat and allowing yourself to make that choice. Like, yes, I know that if I have a few more bites, I'm going to be full. And then if I have a few more bites, I'm going to be a little bit more full than usual, but that's okay. And
Right.
I can deal
And
with
it's also okay, like if you are eating and you know that you're full and you're like, I really don't want to eat those last few bites, but I feel like I shouldn't leave the food on, right? You grew up part of the clean plate club.
it.
So it's getting over that, whatever feelings you get if you don't finish everything on your plate. So whatever feelings come up for you with that, it's letting that go and realizing that it is okay. You do not have to finish everything on your plate if it is going to put you past the point. If you're just like not enjoying what it tastes like anymore or whatever, or if you're just going to put you past the point of comfortable fullness and you're aware of that and you're not willing to go there.
Yeah. Someone actually recently pointed out to me that I do often leave at least a few bites of food on my plate when I'm finished. Not all the time, but often. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting because obviously I took a little bit too much than what my belly actually needed.
Mhm,
It's hard to eyeball because who knows? Like,
mhm,
or if
right.
you're really hungry, your eyes are bigger than your stomach, right? And so you pile up all this food and then you're like, oh, I actually didn't quite need that much. Um, so I'm gonna stop here.
Mhm,
And it could, sometimes it can turn into this food rule too, like I have to leave a few bites on my plate so I don't feel like I overate or whatever it might be. So just pay attention to like how it feels and what is happening in your mind when you're working through this.
mhm. Yeah, because we talked about that before. There used to be this commercial for, I can't remember if it was a diet pill or what it was for, but it showed all these plates with a little bit of food left on it, basically saying, just stop. Like not like what we're trying to teach you to, like, how is it feeling in your body? No, just regardless of how you're feeling, stop and leave some food on your plate,
Yeah.
because think calories you're saving, right?
Right.
Over time, and then it would show like, ramped up to like 100 plates with, and look at how, it all adds up, is what they were saying.
Mm,
And that's not what we're saying. We're just
right.
saying
Exactly.
go by how you're feeling
For
with
sure.
that.
Definitely.
So how can we make it, let's say we want to eat like the Europeans, or the Mexicans or whatever. How can we make our eating experiences more enjoyable?
I'm so glad you asked. There's so many ways. So
Well,
one one way is to really start working on mindful eating. And, all the things that we're about to talk about, we don't expect you to do them every single meal, every day. It's just like when you have time, or maybe make some time to start working on these things, because it does take time to do these things. So we don't expect everyone to be able to do it all the time right off. That's not what we're saying either. So just making sure I put that out there. So
right.
mindful eating is sort of like what Carrie was describing earlier with the piece of chocolate, like really noticing everything about the food you're eating and like slowing it down a little bit.
Mhm.
notice the appearance, notice the smell, notice the texture when your fork or utensil goes into it if you're using a utensil. And then when you put it in your mouth, just sort of like let it linger there for a minute. See how it feels, see what the temperature is like, see what the taste is like, and then start chewing. And again, notice all the same things. Like, does chewing change it? Um, is there are there different textures in there? Like going back to the cupcakes again, a lot of them have like the cake and then the frosting, and then sometimes they have like crunchy little candies on the top of the frosting or something. So there's a bunch of different textures happening all at the same time. Um, or soups are multi-textured. Or like yogurt. Yogurt's really smooth all the way through unless you're adding something to it.
Mhm.
And then, you know, chew it thoroughly, get the enjoyment out of that flavor and the taste. And then when you're ready, you can swallow it and, keep going with the snack or meal or whatever you have.
Right. Some of this is going to sound absurd to,
Yeah,
if you've never looked at eating like this and think like, this just sounds so silly. Um, but it's just part of the process, and it's not like and again, it's like any other habit. The more you practice it, you're not going to have to sit there and think as
right,
much, right? It's just the beginning of this process. When you're starting to change these habits, it's going to take a little bit more time, a little bit more thought, and mindfulness.
right. And it's exactly like Carrie was talking about earlier with like, we're just slowing down to notice the food and enjoy it instead of just speeding past it and not letting our brain even realize what we're doing.
Right.
Um, so we can focus on it. Focusing on the fact that we're eating can make a huge difference in hunger
Mhm.
fullness cues, the getting the satisfaction, all those parts. And,
And
making, go ahead.
oops, go ahead.
No, no, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it's easier to practice mindful eating when you're not in the hangry.
Yes.
When
Don't
you're
do it. Don't do
don't
it.
get to the hangry point, it's a lot harder because you just at that point you're just eating as a means to an end, which is to take that hangry feeling away.
Exactly.
Um, so yeah, I just wanted to.
So definitely. So choose a time, like when when is a good time for you to be able to practice this for a couple minutes, it doesn't have to take half an hour, take 5 minutes, whatever.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Like you're not sitting there at the dinner table for an hour doing
right,
this unless you
right,
want to.
right, exactly. And that's totally up to you.
Right.
Um, and speaking of time, like make the time that you're eating a priority. So a lot of us are very often like working through our meals or snacks or doing other things while we're eating, especially I think the beginning of the day meals or maybe
Mhm.
even dinner time. I am just as, you know, I hate the word guilty, but I'm going to use it. Just as guilty as other people of like, okay, well, it's time to eat, but oh, part of the meal isn't quite finished yet, or oh, let's, you know, do the dishes while other people are eating, or, putting food away. Like, just stop it and take that time so that you can, again, focus on that eating experience.
Yeah, yeah, and like if you're at work instead of sitting at your computer continuing to work, right? Um, step away from it.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of you are thinking, I can't, I've got all this work I've got to do. I've got to, but there is evidence, in research that shows that taking breaks like every hour, um, actually you end up being more productive.
Right. And
So,
if you're paying attention to your food too, you probably feel a little bit more energized, a little bit more um clear-headed.
yep. Yeah. So just try it. Like, take even 20 minutes and step away, go outside. If you can get outside for, if the weather's conducive or whatever, and get outside to eat. So then you also get some fresh air and some sunshine, and just see if it makes a difference in how energized you feel and how productive you are. the rest of the afternoon. Because most of us, I dare say, probably go into the slump, right?
Hmm.
Is if you are getting away from your desk for a break, um, you're going to be more refreshed going
Sure.
back to.
And then we're also not like, what's the word I want? Relating our meals to work.
Mhm.
Relating is not the word I want. But I can't think of it. Like we're we're working and we're eating, and so then we like, Carrie, what is the word I want?
It's like you, I know what you're saying, I think. It's like you, I can't think of it. Like you're equating like food with work, and if you
Correlating? I don't know. That's
don't
we're
like work, you're not gonna like food or not like
yeah. It's
that
not
kind of
an enjoyable experience, right? Because you're working and
right,
like having to work through your lunch is not it's
right.
not a positive feeling, I feel like, even though we all or most of us do it.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So hopefully that made sense to you all.
I mean, you love your job, and
Right, right. For sure.
you know, but
Yeah.
all right,
So
what
sitting
else?
at the table, like Carrie said, or moving away from your desk, even at least turning away from your computer or like your
Mhm.
distracting work place if you don't have.
And your phone.
Yes, put your phone away.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
What else? You could take a couple deep breaths before you start eating just to kind of like reset your nervous system a little bit, as Carrie usually says.
Yep.
Um,
And pay attention to the sensations that you're feeling.
yeah,
Um,
because
like we've already mentioned, like taking the time to taste each bite. What does it taste like? What does it feel like in your mouth? What does it smell like? What did it look like before it went in your mouth?
right. And taste each bite too, not just like the first few. Like
Mhm.
I feel like especially when we're on our phone or whatever, the first few bites might taste great and we're really excited about them, but then we're just eating
To
out
eat.
of like muscle memory almost. We're
Mhm.
just bringing the fork in and, and then we might not be paying attention to our fullness cues and all of that stuff.
Right.
And yeah, sometimes it doesn't taste as good towards the end. So then we can just check in like, hey, do I need more? Is this okay? Do I want to move on to something else if I have different options? Um, yeah.
Yeah, we really challenge those of you that feel like you have to finish everything on the plate or in your container or what, when if you brought your lunch or whatever. Um, Challenge yourself to really start paying attention to how you're feeling. And do you need those last few bites? If you do, absolutely eat up, right? Like that's not
Yeah.
saying to leave them. But don't, it's time to stop feeling guilty for leaving them.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And that, doing all these things, you can actually like pay attention to your fullness also. So
Hmm.
especially when you're first figuring out your fullness, if you've been having trouble or you don't feel it, or you feel like you only eat past comfortable fullness, like slowing down and paying attention to these things. And when we talk about mindful eating, it's just talking about making observations. It's not about making judgments. It's
Hmm.
just noticing, like we talk about. So instead of saying, like, oh, I'm past comfortable fullness, so now, I didn't do it right, or whatever the thought might be, that's not what we're aiming for either.
No, 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 no beating yourself. There's no perfect one way to do this, and you're going to that's just like Ashley said, it's part of quote unquote normal eating, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes we eat too much, sometimes we're not going to eat enough, sometimes we're going to eat on the go and rush, rush, rush. That almost rhymed. I didn't even mean to.
That's okay.
um so it's like stop beating yourself up. We need to stop beating ourselves up and feeling guilty for everything. Like
Hmm.
we all have to eat. You have to eat, and you might as well enjoy it.
Yeah, it's better that way.
Yeah,
More fun.
and make your environment pleasant too. Like one of my friends, she's like, I light candles at dinner time, and not just on special occasions, but she lights the candles, and she always has fresh flowers, and like she makes it a pleasant environment that you want to sit down at and eat.
Right. Yep. That's a great point too.
which
Like
means you got to clean off your dining room table from all those books and coats and laundry.
envelopes, whatever you got on there. For sure. And
Yep.
trying to go into your meals when you're like starting to get hungry or are like medium hungry level instead of like the hangry, I'm gonna eat everything. And obviously, it's not
Yeah.
possible every time, but the more you're able to do it, like Carrie said earlier, that the decision making brain can hang out. When we're too hungry, we don't have that. It's not capable of turning on yet.
Right. And I know some of you right now are thinking, well, how does this work with the family? Right? Because you can't gauge everyone's hunger and
Right.
stuff. So one thing that came to mind when you were saying that, Ashley, was, when kids want a snack and parents are like, no, 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 you're gonna ruin your dinner. Um, is that, well, maybe they need a little snack to get to the point so they're not hangry.
Hmm.
So think of, like, for your kids, what snacks could you have available? Cheese stick.
Hmm.
It probably isn't going to ruin their, quote unquote, ruin their dinner or ruin their appetite or whatever. Something to get them, if it's going to be an hour or 45 minutes or 30 minutes till dinner time, if they just need a little snack to tide them over, because that way you're teaching them, oh, it's okay. I don't want you to get hangry either, because
Hmm.
kids could also get that feeling. Um,
Oh, yes, they do very often, in fact.
mhm. So helping them also realize their hunger, because they don't usually ask to eat something if they're not hungry yet.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Um, Trying to avoid tension around your meal times too is a good one. Like, let's not talk about stressful topics at the dinner table. And this is where like not working through your lunch can come into. Um, Take a break from all that. Like we said, we want it to be like a positive experience.
Yeah.
So the more not positive things that pile up while we're eating. Okay, maybe we're scrolling on social media and it makes us feel like crap about ourselves. Maybe we're responding to emails in between that are not fun. Maybe we don't like the food we're eating. Like, see how all these things just are making this experience kind of miserable?
Yeah, and the thing is too, like we talked about the vagus nerve before. The vagus nerve, the nickname is also the rest and digest nerve,
Hmm.
because when you are in a tense state, your digestive system doesn't work as well. And you're more likely to get, upset belly, gas, bloating, and that sort of thing, reflux, when you're all tense and you're not relaxed. When you're relaxed, your digestive system works much better and can kind of do its thing. So there's another reason behind it too. Is not just for your actual eating, but for your digestion also.
That makes a lot of sense. So, like, if you're always tense or stressed when you're eating and you have belly issues,
Mm-hmm.
that could definitely be part of it. So,
Like if you're eating and it goes right through you
mhm.
and you're running to the bathroom, check your stress level and how you're feeling.
Yeah, do what you can for sure.
Yeah.
Then one of my favorite ones is also like providing variety because it keeps things fun and interesting. And we're not getting sick of the foods that we're eating, right? We talked about that in one of the podcast episodes and how our body tends to go in phases with kind of what it's feeling like. And that is part of how it works so that we
Mhm.
can get different nutrition. So if you're normally eating, I don't know, a lot of marinara sauce the past week or two, I don't
Which, oh,
switch to something else. You could still have pasta. Like Carrie said, like switch to Alfredo sauce. Switch to something else.
or pesto. We love pesto.
Yep,
Um, yeah, I like that.
definitely.
And
Um,
I already touched on this. Don't settle, like, you're not obligated to finish eating a food just because you took a bite of it or it's on your plate. So let's say
yeah.
something good, right? Or you felt pressure to take someone's like, I brought this, you have to try it. And so you take some and you try it and they're like, "Meh." Yeah, not for me. How do you get around that though, Ashley? Like without being rude or looking.
It's tricky. It depends on how the situation unfolds. Sometimes you could take it and be like, "Oh, I just had lunch or this other meal, so I'll have it in a little bit when I'm ready for a snack," and you don't have to eat it in front of them. That's one
Hmm.
way. You can eat it on your own time and decide if you even want to try it or not. Um, Sometimes you can take a bite just to be nice if you feel like you have to do that. Um, and then you don't have to eat the whole thing in front of them.
Right.
I don't
Or
know.
you can say, "Oh, I'm really full. I'm going to save this for later." Right.
Right,
Like,
right.
yeah,
Yeah,
there, and um, yeah, because that could be a tricky one depending on who you're.
yeah. And something else I just thought of too is like whenever there's free food, I don't know what it is, but our human brain is like free food. Oh my gosh, we just have to like devour
Mm,
it. We have
yeah.
to go have it. And most of the time it's crap. Like if someone brings donuts into the break room, not to say that donuts are bad, but by the time you get to them, they might be stale and or the ones you don't like are the only options or cookies that have been in there for 3 days. Like I feel like we have this pull to them sometimes, even though they're not good. So if they're stale, throw them away for everybody else. Like,
Right.
do everyone a favor. If you really want to try one and you haven't yet, like, try a bite of it and then decide, oh, this
Do I
is,
want? Yeah.
yeah, do I want to keep eating this? And it's
Hmm.
okay to say no.
Right.
Yeah.
'Cause we're just like so. Yeah, that's a great point with the free food. I hadn't thought about that one.
Yeah. I think about that a lot.
Well, you put anything out on the front of your house with a free sign and it's gone.
Right?
There's free that people gravitate to.
For sure. Yeah. And like checking in during your meals with yourself. We kinda talked about this a little bit, but does it still taste good?
Mm,
Um, One way you can sort of narrow this down is, like, rating your taste pleasure in the first few bites, like, on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 or whatever, and then when you feel like you're about halfway through, uh, check in and rate it again, and then when you're getting towards your last few bites, do the same thing and just kinda notice it. And you can decide like, "Oh, this food kept its flavor, pleasure for me quite the whole time for this meal," or, "This other food, it was good for the first few bites, and then I wasn't enjoying it anymore. Maybe we won't have this as often, or maybe I didn't like it at all the whole way through." And sometimes that's okay too, because we just had to eat something,
mm,
right? Remember, it's
right,
that non-judgmental thinking, it's just the observation piece.
right. Which is very, very difficult to do
Mhm.
because our society judges one way or the other,
Yeah, everything.
whether you're judging someone else or you're judging yourself. And yeah, it's a, that can take a while, by the way, too. Like none of this, it just happens overnight. This takes, it's a process and it's a journey. Uh,
Exactly.
be compassionate with yourself and it's hard too if you are trying to practice these principles and no one else in your friend group or your family is then, and you might get some pushback like what are you doing, like why are you eating that, or why aren't you eating like
Right.
it can go either way. So it like I said, it takes some practice and it takes some strength on your part to just know what's best for you.
And just try it. Like, you have to be a little brave sometimes too, like Carrie talks about, like, just try it out. There's no right or wrong answer to it. See how it goes, see what you like or don't like about it, and you could take a break from it for a while and then come back to it or
Hmm.
however you feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So we talked about mindful eating.
Mhm.
So if there's mindful eating, there must be mindless eating.
Yeah, kind of. So, we've touched on this a little bit throughout, but I like to I feel like a lot of people call it mindless eating, but what it really is distracted eating.
Mm,
Because and I like to talk about it like that because we take more of a responsibility, right? It's not happening to me.
hmm.
I'm doing this.
Right.
Um, So what is distracted eating? It's basically when we're doing something else or we're preoccupied while we're eating. So watching TV, flipping through a magazine, working, scrolling on our phone, whatever.
You're just not
Um,
paying attention to what's going in your mouth at all.
exactly.
It's
And
like
so,
distracted driving,
yep.
right? If you're not like totally distracted, like doing, please never text and drive. So, but
Mhm.
that used to be a bigger thing. But even if like how your mind wanders and you're thinking about something and you're driving and it's the route you drive every day, twice a day, back and forth to work or whatever. And all of a sudden you realize, whoa, where did the last 4 miles go?
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that, where you just kind of putting food in your mouth and not paying attention.
Hmm.
And then the next thing you know, that whole bag of cookies is gone, right?
Yeah.
And you didn't even, so yeah.
Right. And you definitely don't get satisfaction from that. Like your brain doesn't
No.
even know you did that. And so you might not even feel full, even though you ate a large quantity of food. Like, and I feel
Mhm.
like this is where a lot of people get nervous or maybe a little freaked out about eating because if I can sit there and eat a whole bag of chips or cookies, oh my gosh, I'm so bad. And really, like, were you paying attention to that food? Were you savoring that food or were you distracted? And so you didn't even notice it. Like,
Mhm.
it's two different things for sure. And a lot
Right.
of, yeah, a lot of research has found like we tend to eat faster when we're distracted, um,
Mm,
tend to
yeah.
eat more when we're distracted. Sometimes we don't even remember like what you ate when you were distracted. We definitely don't feel as full, and we definitely like the whole episode is about. You definitely don't tend to get that satisfaction because you didn't savor the experience. You just kind
Right.
of filled up your belly, maybe.
Right. Yeah. Depending on what you filled it up with, it
Right,
might pass through you pretty quickly if
right.
it's, um, simple carbs with no protein or fat or so. Yeah. Um, and I think I dare say most of us
Hmm.
do distracted eating.
Yeah. And I mean, again, part of normal eating is doing this sometimes, but when we're doing it most of the time or all of the time, and
Mhm.
we feel like we're always hungry, well, let's take a look at are we usually doing something else when we're eating? And if that's the case, we probably are always feeling hungry because our fullness cues cannot kick in because we're not
Right.
paying attention to our food.
Hmm. Good point.
Yeah.
I love this. Anything else you want to add to it?
I don't think so. I think we talked about a lot of different stuff. Um, I think just like we said, trying to make eating more of a positive experience and
Mhm.
enjoying what you're eating most of the time can make such a big difference in
Mhm.
your relationship with food, how you feel about food, how you feel about yourself, and that like body self trust.
Yep.
And it is a little bit scary.
It is. And there's also other benefits too to sitting down, like as a family for dinner, um, and benefits to the kids, and things like that too. So it goes beyond just yourself and what you're feeding yourself. But there's a lot of sort of, mental health benefits to sitting down.
Yeah, those social connections.
Hmm. Yep. Yep. So give it a try tonight.
Yeah.
And there could also, I'm gonna say, throw this out there too. If you grew up in a home that, well, one, didn't sit down as a family, so to you, that feels odd, right?
Hmm.
Or did, but there were always fights at the family dinner table, right? So you kind of try to avoid that. But just remember, like that doesn't have to shape who you are now.
Right.
Like
That
that,
doesn't have to be your
you
story
don't-
anymore.
exactly. That doesn't, you don't have to carry on that generational stuff like that. So yeah, just
Great
wanted to.
point.
All right, awesome. Well, this was great.
Yeah. If
Happy
you
birthday,
want,
and I
oh,
hope you get
thank
cake.
you. Thank you. You can find us on social media if you want to be connected to us a little bit more often than just the podcast episodes. Um, and for even more connection, we have our pod squad, which meets once a month. The link for more info is in the show notes, so you can check that out. It's really fun. We just talk basically about like the past few episodes of the podcast, and you get to ask questions. It's kind of like small group coaching almost. We have a lot of fun with it. What we talk about is like not recorded and it doesn't get on the podcast. So you got to
No
come
problem.
check it out.
I'd love to have you.
Yes, definitely.
Well, until next time,
Yes, love you latte.
love you, latte.